They said she was cursed from the day she was born. In the shadowed alleys of Wasit, whispers followed her like flies. Mothers clutched their children when she passed. Market vendors crossed their fingers and turned their backs. Even the priests, who were sworn to show mercy, refused her entry into the temple. Her name was Neferu. Her eyes were unlike anyone else's, one as deep and golden as the desert sun, the other pale like bone ash. Some said she was a demon in human skin, sent by the gods to test them. Others believed her mother had made a pact with dark spirits to conceive her. The truth was simpler, but no less painful. She was born the same night the plague swept through her village, claiming nearly 100 lives, including the high priest's own son. Ever since then, they had called her the Poison of Wasit. She grew up in silence, speaking only when necessary, never smiling unless alone. Her father died when she was 5, trampled by a spooked camel in the marketplace. Her mother followed 2 winters later, coughing blood until the healer refused to enter their home. Alone and unwanted, Neferu wandered the outskirts of the city, surviving off scraps, selling wild herbs and salt she gathered from the Nile's banks. But the hatred never left. When livestock fell ill, it was her fault. When a child drowned in the irrigation canals, they pointed at her. Even when a storm ruined half the crops, a neighbor cried out, "It's the girl! Her curse lingers!" She had no one, no friends, no home that truly felt hers. Only the stars above offered any kindness, watching her silently as she lay alone each night near the temple ruins. But something changed the day the new royal healer arrived in Wasit. His name was Menmaatre, tall, solemn, with eyes that had seen too much war and too much grief. He came not for fame, but to escape his past. When he first saw Neferu, she was bartering with a priestess over the price of dried lotus roots. Their eyes met only for a moment, but in that heartbeat, something stirred. She expected him to look away in fear or disgust, as others did. But he didn't. He looked again, closer, with curiosity, not contempt, with sorrow, not fear. She left without a word, but his gaze followed her long after she disappeared into the shadows. That evening, as Menmaatre walked the sacred paths beneath the moonlight, he asked one of the elder scribes, "Who is the girl with the golden and pale eyes?" The scribe sighed and muttered, "The Poison of Wasit. Touch her, and ruin follows." But the healer only looked up at the stars and whispered to himself, "Or maybe, she's the cure." Menmaatre had seen suffering before. He had stitched wounds on warriors gasping their final breaths, held children dying of fever in border towns, and watched kings weep over dead heirs. But there was something different about Neferu, something he couldn't name. In the days following their first encounter, he found himself watching her from afar, not out of suspicion, but a strange, quiet fascination. Every morning she emerged from the broken archway of the old temple ruins, her figure wrapped in coarse linen, too thin for the desert chill. She moved like wind over stone, silent, alert, deliberate. Menmaatre would pretend to browse the spice stalls while observing her bartering with hawk-eyed traders who spat near her feet once the deal was done. He noticed how she always paid in exact coin, how she never begged or pleaded, and how she bowed slightly even when insulted. Once, he saw a boy knock over her small basket of dried herbs and then run. She didn't chase. She simply gathered what was left, stood up, and walked away with her head high. She was used to being broken, but not defeated. That stirred something in him. One evening, he asked the scribe again, "Why does no one help her?" The old man shrugged. "Because people fear what they do not understand. Because pain makes them cruel." The healer said nothing. But that night he dreamed of Neferu standing in a field of red poppies, her hands glowing with golden light, while the people of Wasit stood at a distance, weeping. The next morning, he left his home early and placed a small linen pouch filled with healing salves and sweet dates near the ruined temple entrance. He didn't sign it. He just watched from the shadows as she found it. Neferu looked around, her eyes narrowing. She opened the pouch cautiously, then examined the salves with the eyes of someone who understood medicine. She didn't smile, but she didn't throw it away either. Instead, she clutched it to her chest and disappeared inside the ruins. That evening, Menmaatre sat beneath the shade of a sycamore fig near the Nile, questioning himself. He had sworn an oath never to interfere unless asked. But was this interference or compassion? Was he drawn to her because of pity? Number. It wasn't pity. It was something deeper, a quiet recognition, a bond between two people who had known exile in different forms, she from society, he from his past. Days passed. He left more pouches, sometimes dried figs, other times bandages or honey. Each time she took them. She never spoke, never sought him. But one evening he found something new in return, a single dried lotus blossom wrapped in cloth, resting where he usually placed the pouch. A gift, a thank you. Menmaatre's fingers closed around the blossom as if it were a sacred relic. The poison of Wasit had responded, and somewhere deep inside, something told him. This was the beginning. It began with whispers, as it always did. "She's bewitched the healer," someone muttered outside the grain storehouse. "He's cursed now, too," another said near the temple steps. Within days, the rumors twisted into something uglier. Menmaatre's kindness had become a threat to the order of Wasit. Neferu, once ignored and avoided, was now watched with sharpened suspicion. The priestess who had once hissed at her now glared as if she were the hand of Set himself. One morning, Neferu noticed a strange silence in the market. Vendors avoided her, but now with unease instead of disgust. Children who used to throw stones at her hid behind their mothers. Something was wrong. By noon, she knew what it was. She was filling her jug near the northern canal when 4 men approached, sons of merchants, boys she had known as cruel shadows since her childhood. "The poison thinks she can charm a healer now?" one sneered. "What are you doing with his gifts, witch?" said another. She turned to leave, but they grabbed her arms. "You should never have been allowed to live," the tallest growled. She kicked, screamed, fought with the desperation of someone who had only herself. But no one came. No one helped. The people nearby looked away, pretended not to see. They dragged her to the water, shouting, "Let's cleanse the curse. If she survives, the gods want her. If not, she was never meant to live." The water was cold, violent. It rushed into her lungs as they pushed her under. She thrashed, the world a blur of bubbles and burning. Time stretched, her strength faded. Then, hands, strong, steady, pulling her up, air, light, voices shouting. And then Menmaatre's face, furious, wet, alive. He carried her out of the canal in his arms, his white robe soaked and stained with mud. "What have you done?" he roared at the crowd. "Are you animals?" No one answered. Some fled. Others stood frozen, ashamed. Neferu coughed violently, shivering in his arms, half-conscious. He laid her down gently, covering her with his outer robe. "She's a child of the Nile, as are all of you," he said, voice shaking. "And yet you tried to kill her, in the name of gods who teach mercy." He looked at the priests nearby. "You did nothing. You call yourselves servants of Mayat?" The silence that followed was damning. That night he sat by her side in the ruins, tending to her wounds with gentle hands. She didn't speak, but her eyes stayed open, watching him with something between awe and disbelief. No one had ever saved her before. No one had ever fought for her. When he offered her a sip of water, her fingers touched his hand. A whisper escaped her lips. "Why?" Menmaatre looked at her, his voice barely audible. "Because you matter. And because no one ever saved me either." In that moment, something sacred passed between them. An unspoken vow born of shared suffering. The city of Wasit didn't sleep easily after the incident. Word of what had happened at the canal spread like wildfire, from the merchant quarters to the palace kitchens. Some said the healer had gone mad, protecting a cursed girl from divine justice. Others whispered that Menmaatre had fallen under her spell, that she had drawn him in with dark magic and now controlled him like a puppet. The temples buzzed with fear, and among the scribes, a quiet but coordinated effort began. Neferu had survived, yes, but that survival was seen not as proof of innocence, but as an omen. "The gods are patient," said the high priest of Amun to his inner circle, "but not blind." It was the priesthood who sent the first warning. Menmaatre received it in the form of a scroll, sealed with wax, delivered at dawn. He opened it slowly, his hands calm but his heart already tense. The message was simple. Healers serve the living, not the cursed. Distance yourself or fall with her. He read it twice, then burned it. He knew what it meant. The elite were watching him now. His reputation, his position as the royal healer, and even his safety were now entangled with the fate of a girl everyone feared. That night, he did not return home. Instead, he returned to the ruins, to Neferu. She sat on a stone slab, her legs tucked beneath her, face illuminated by the soft flicker of an oil lamp. "They warned you, didn't they?" she said without looking at him. He didn't answer. She smiled faintly. "It always happens. The moment someone helps me, they realize it's easier not to." He knelt beside her. "I'm not afraid of their warnings." "Then you're a fool," she replied, her voice soft. "No," he said, reaching into his satchel and pulling out a small, flat piece of lapis lazuli tied to a thin leather cord. "I'm a man who once lost everything because I stood on the sidelines. I won't do it again." He handed it to her. "Wear this. It's for protection." Neferu took it, hesitated, then tied it around her neck. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They'll come again. And next time, they won't just try to drown me. They'll try to bury me." Menmaatre looked at her, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "Then they'll have to bury me too." In that moment, the healer who once swore never to become involved had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer a silent observer, no longer a hidden benefactor. He had stepped into the circle of fire willingly, knowing the price it might demand. Across the city, in the temple of Anubis, the high priest lit black incense and said a quiet prayer. "If the healer will not step away from the poison," he said grimly, "then let the poison consume him too." The gods, he believed, would not tolerate defiance, and soon judgment would descend on them both. The sun was melting into the horizon, casting long shadows across the sandstone streets of Wasit. Neferu was returning from the banks of the Nile, her basket half filled with wild herbs and dried reeds, when she felt it, the strange stillness in the air. No children played near the alleys. No voices called out across the rooftops. The city held its breath. Then she heard footsteps, not hurried or clumsy, but measured, like a funeral drum. She turned, and they were there, 3 temple guards cloaked in black, faces hidden beneath polished bronze masks. "By order of the high priest," one said, "you are to come with us." She didn't run. She knew it would be useless. She had always known this day would come. They bound her wrists, not with chains, but with a silk cord inscribed with protective spells, as if touching her directly would burn them. She was paraded through the city in silence. People stepped aside, eyes downcast. No one dared intervene. She was taken not to a prison, but to the inner sanctum beneath the temple of Amun, the place where curses were broken, where oracles were punished, and where secrets were buried. The chamber was cold, built of black stone etched with ancient glyphs warning of divine wrath. In its center sat the high priest, flanked by 2 lesser priests and an old woman known only as the mouth of the dead, a seer said to speak the gods' anger. Neferu was forced to kneel before them. The high priest stood. "Neferu, daughter of no name," he intoned, "you have brought unrest to Wasit. You walk with the favor of no god. You bear the mark of disaster. We are here to purge that which threatens Ma'at, The balance. She met his eyes, unflinching. "What have I done? I've harmed no one." "You exist," he said coldly. "That is enough." The old woman stepped forward, her milky eyes glowing faintly. She took a vial of oil and an obsidian blade, placing them on the altar. "Shall I begin the severing?" she asked. The high priest nodded. "Let the ritual show us if she is human or a vessel of chaos." Before the blade could touch her, the chamber doors burst open. Menmaatre stormed in, flanked by 2 Nubian guards he had bribed to follow him. "This ritual is unlawful," he shouted. "She has not been judged by the temple court. You overstep your authority." The high priest sneered. "You forget your place, healer." "No," Menmaatre said, stepping in front of Neferu, arms spread. "You have forgotten yours. If the gods wish to strike her down, let them do it. But not through trembling hands hiding behind false rituals." The chamber shook. Whether from a tremor or the force of Menmatre's defiance, none could say. The mouth of the dead fell to her knees, whispering frantically, The gods are watching! They are not pleased!" Silence fell, and in that moment, the fate of Neferu and Menmaatre teetered between the wrath of men and the mercy of something far older. They fled that night beneath the cover of darkness, as the chants of priests echoed faintly across the Nile. Menmaatre knew the temple would come for him. His defiance had not only humiliated the high priest, it had challenged the entire religious order of Waset. There would be no forgiveness. Neferu, still shaken and weak from the failed ritual, leaned on him as they made their way through the papyrus reeds along the river's edge. Her wrists were bruised from the silk bindings, and the weight of what had nearly happened clung to her like smoke. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. "You've destroyed your life." He didn't respond. Instead, he guided her to a waiting camel tethered just beyond the date groves. Supplies were already strapped to the saddle: water skins, dried bread, and a satchel of healing herbs. "We're going east," he finally said, helping her mount the camel. "The desert will hide us." For 3 days they journeyed under the unforgiving sun. The city disappeared behind them, swallowed by sand and silence. The winds howled at night, and the stars blinked like watchful eyes. Menmaatre shared stories from his past, of his service in distant war camps, of patience he had failed, of a younger brother who once died in his arms because no healer arrived in time. Neferu listened, speaking little, but her silence was no longer one of fear. It was the silence of someone beginning to believe she was not alone. On the 4th day, they reached the ruins of an abandoned desert shrine dedicated to an almost forgotten goddess of protection. Crumbling columns half buried in sand offered the only shade for miles. "We'll rest here," Menmaatre said. He cleared space within the shrine's cracked walls and started a small fire. As he prepared their meager meal, Neferu stood beneath a faded carving of the goddess, a woman with the wings of a falcon and the eyes of a lion. "Do you think she'll protect us?" she asked softly. Menmaatre looked up. "I think she already has." That night, as the desert wind whispered through the hollow temple, Neferu woke from a dream of drowning, of fire, of voices chanting her name in hatred. She gasped, and Menmaatre was beside her in an instant. "It's all right," he said, brushing damp hair from her face. "You're safe." "I don't know who I am anymore," she said. "I was their curse, their scapegoat. But you see something else." "I see someone worth saving," he replied. "Not because the gods say so, but because I do." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "Then maybe I can be something new, not poison, but precious," he finished, and for the first time since her childhood, Neferu smiled. A real smile, small and trembling. The desert did not speak, but in that stillness, something ancient stirred, as if the goddess herself had exhaled and whispered back. Yes, in the shadowed corridors of the Temple of Amun, the silence had turned venomous. Menmaatre's escape with Neferu had not only disgraced the priesthood, it had fractured their authority. The high priest, once a pillar of fear and wisdom, now paced his sanctum like a restless jackal, consumed by humiliation. He defied us, he muttered to his council. He made a mockery of the gods. But it was not wrath alone that stirred the temple into action. It was fear. Fear that if Neferu survived, her existence would undermine their sacred rituals. If the so-called poison could walk free, what else had they been wrong about? The council agreed. It was not enough to capture them. They had to erase them. But temples did not operate in haste. They moved through shadows, through whispers, through betrayal. And so they summoned Setepenre, a younger priest with a gaze as cold as Nile stone and a reputation for obedience cloaked in piety. He was once Menmaatre's pupil, a boy who had watched the healer stitch flesh and crush herbs with the same reverence he showed the scrolls of Thoth. But envy had long soured his heart. When the council offered him the task of locating and silencing his old master, he accepted without hesitation. "You will bring her back," the high priest said, "alive or dead, and the traitor with her." Setepenre bowed. "By the gods' will." He left Wasit the next morning with a caravan of temple riders, cloaked in sand-colored linen and bearing the silent weapons of ritual enforcers, knives curved like crescent moons and oils laced with venom. Meanwhile, deep in the desert ruins, Menmaatre sensed the danger before he saw it. "The wind has changed," he told Neferu as they prepared to move. "They're coming." "Then we run?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not this time. We hide, and we watch." They buried their tracks beneath the dunes, covered their supplies in stone crevices, and descended into a hidden cistern beneath the shrine, an ancient water channel long forgotten by time and man. For 2 days the riders circled the shrine, inspecting bones, broken jars, and half-buried glyphs. Setepenre dismounted on the 3rd day, his fingers tracing the faded symbols etched into the goddess's wing. "He would come here," he said. "He always believed in lost things." That night, as the riders slept in the hollow ruins, Menmaatre emerged silently from below, his feet bare on the cool sand. He stood over the sleeping form of his former student, and for a long moment said nothing. Then he whispered, "I taught you to heal, Setepenre. You chose to hunt." But mercy was not his purpose, only warning. He left an empty vial beside Setepenre's hand, a healer's mark, a final message. When Setepenre awoke, the vial told him everything. "We see you, and we are not running anymore." The chase was no longer a hunt, it was a reckoning. And somewhere beneath the goddess's gaze, the balance had begun to shift. The desert had a way of transforming those who dared to survive it. Neferu was no longer the shunned girl of Wasit, no longer a shadow lurking in ruined temples. Day by day, under the endless sun and beneath the watchful stars, she changed. The wilderness stripped her of fear, and Menmaatre's quiet strength gave her something she had never known before: worth. Together, they built a sanctuary in the ruins of the goddess's temple. Not grand, not rich, but sacred. Travelers began to arrive. Wounded men, feverish children, women cast out by husbands or priests. At first they came seeking Menmaatre, the healer of kings. But it was Neferu who knelt beside them, cleaned their wounds, ground herbs, and whispered comfort. They saw the kindness in her eyes, the way she moved with quiet command. They didn't see a curse. They saw a queen in linen. Word spread beyond the desert. There was a woman in the east who healed without judgment, who asked for nothing but silence and honesty in return. They called her the Falcon's Mercy. Wasit, meanwhile, twisted with unrest. The people had begun to question. "Where is the poison?" they whispered. "Why has the drought worsened since she left? Why does the high priest fear her return?" For every effort the temple made to silence Neferu's name, the more it echoed in markets and homes. Even Setepenre, once certain of his mission, now hesitated. He sat in the ruins for days, reading the healer's old texts and listening to the sick speak her name with reverence. Doubt was poison to the priesthood, and it was spreading. In the temple, the high priest fumed. "The people forget. They lose fear. That girl must die, or she will return to rule them." But it was too late. One moonless night, An envoy from the outer provinces arrived at the goddess's shrine. A noblewoman wrapped in gold-threaded linen, her face marked with the ink of royal blood. She bowed before Neferu and said, "My son was dying. You saved him. The court speaks your name in secret. They speak of returning balance, of placing you where the gods clearly intended you to be." Neferu stood in silence. Her hands, once rough from gathering herbs in shame, now bore the grace of someone who had touched hundreds with healing. She looked at the stars, the same ones that had once watched her sleep alone. "I was called poison," she said softly. "They burned my name. Now they want to crown me." Menmaatre stepped beside her. "What will you say?" She looked at him, her anchor, her witness, her salvation, and replied, "I will not return to beg at the gates of Waset, but if they open them to the people I serve, I will walk in not as a girl they feared, but as a queen they never deserved." The noblewoman bowed again. "Then it shall be done." That night, in the temple of a forgotten goddess, a new kind of royalty was born, not from blood, but from survival, compassion, and fire. It began with a murmur, soft as desert wind but swelling like a coming storm. From the farthest villages near the eastern cliffs to the farmers kneeling in the Nile mud, the name Neferu carried with it no longer fear, but fierce devotion. They came in caravans and clusters, healed mothers clutching infants once thought lost, old warriors with wounds long sealed by her hands, children who knew only her laughter and kindness. Their feet wore down the road to Waset, and their chants grew louder each day. "Falcon's mercy!" they cried. "The girl you shamed has become the one who saves." The temple watched with dread. From its highest balconies, the priests saw the impossible, a movement not born of violence or conquest, but of healing and memory. The high priest summoned his council, desperation etched across his wrinkled face. "She has bewitched them all," he spat. "Even the nobles whisper her name." But no spell could conjure what Neferu had built, only truth and the ache of people long denied compassion. The pharaoh, pressured by murmurs in his court and whispers from his generals, finally sent word. "If she brings peace, let her speak in the court of gods. Let her step through the gates not as a prisoner, but as a witness." It was the one decree the temple could not overrule. On the day of her return, the sun blazed fiercely. Neferu wore no crown, no gold, only a robe of white linen and the lapis amulet Menmaatre had once given her. At her side walked Menmaatre himself, no longer just a healer, but the man who had defied the old world to protect what was right. As they approached the massive gates of the Temple of Amun, the crowd behind them filled every street, every rooftop. The priests stood atop the steps in silence, their hands trembling beneath their ceremonial staves. Then came the moment that would be etched in the stone of memory forever. The temple doors, centuries old, carved with the faces of gods and laws, swung open, not by priestly command, but by the will of the people. The guards who once barred her path stepped aside, and Neferu entered. Inside, the sacred court was tense with ritual incense and old fear. The pharaoh sat in silence, his gaze piercing. The high priest, white with rage, stepped forward to speak. But Neferu raised her hand, not to silence, but to share. "You called me poison," she said calmly. "But poison only kills. I have healed." She turned to the pharaoh. "If I was a curse, then your people would be dead, but they are alive, and they have come." The pharaoh looked to the crowd outside, then to the priest, then back to Neferu. "Let it be known," he declared, "that this woman has restored what your rituals could not, the balance of Maat. The temple must change, or it will fall." Behind them, the people cheered. The old order had cracked, and the temple's doors, once symbols of silence and fear, had finally fallen open to truth. The temple had opened, but healing an empire wounded by fear would take more than a day. Neferu did not claim a throne. She did not drape herself in gold or demand loyalty from those who once spat at her name. Instead, she remained in the same linen robes, her hands still stained from crushed herbs, her heart still cautious from years of exile. But the city of Wasit changed around her. Where once she walked as a shadow, now flowers bloomed in her footsteps. Children called her Sister of the Nile, and merchants offered her wares not in pity, but in reverence. The temple, once a fortress of judgment, now opened its gates weekly to the sick and the poor, not for sermons, but for salves and warmth. And at the center of it all was the girl who had once been called Poison. Menmaatre stood beside her through every change. He returned to his duties as healer, but no longer bowed to the priests. He answered only to the wounded, the dying, and to Neferu, his equal in both spirit and purpose. At night they walked the gardens newly planted outside the old ruins, now restored as a sanctuary. "Do you miss the silence?" he asked her once, as the sounds of laughter and chanting echoed beyond the walls. "No," she replied softly, "but sometimes I miss being unseen." The eyes that once ignored me were kinder than the ones that watched with expectation. He took her hand then. "Let them watch. Let them see what kindness born of cruelty looks like. Let them see what I see." "And what do you see?" she asked, though she already knew. He turned to her, the same way he had the day they met, when she was bartering lotus roots and the world had not yet broken open. "I see someone who taught the gods shame. I see someone who was called Poison and still chose to heal. I see someone precious." The word hung in the air like a prayer. Seasons passed. Statues were carved in her likeness, not towering or golden, but nestled among the gardens and riverbanks, where reeds swayed gently in the wind. The people did not bow before them. They touched them gently, like family. And in homes across the region, mothers named their daughters Neferu, hoping they too would walk through fire and bloom. On the 10th festival of Ma'at since her return, Neferu stood once again before the temple of Amun. She held no staff, no crown, only a single dried lotus blossom wrapped in cloth. She placed it gently at the base of the old temple door, the same flower she had once left for a healer in secret. The crowd stood silent, many with tears in their eyes, not because she was royalty, not because she had power, but because in her quiet, unyielding way, she had reminded them all of something the priests had long forgotten, that mercy was not weakness, that love was not lawless, and that sometimes the most cursed among us are the ones chosen to restore the world.